I always start with this picture because he was present for all of these conversations. He was in the room, he didn't miss a single session, so he had a very clear sense of the expectations of what people wanted him and future presidents to do. So on his inauguration, which was in April of 1789, he had the written text in front of him, but he understood how much had to be figured out and spent the next 8 years doing so to the best of his ability. It's really hard to list the precedents that Washington established because there are so many that it's almost impossible to distinguish between things like, of course, the two-term precedent to things like what you call the president. Mr. President was something that was decided during Washington's administration. So the first 8 years of Washington's presidency, he's trying to fill out these fuzzy bits. He figures out what it looks like to be a president, how to have this authority. And then in September of 1796, he announces his retirement. This is, of course, a radical act. This is the age of Napoleon. Most people don't willingly give up power twice. But I think what happens next is even more radical. We often end the story with the farewell address, but then we don't always talk about what happens after. And in some ways, what happens after Washington announced his retirement was actually a much more radical act. He wanted to be sure that the first transition, the first time that he was not president, happened while he was alive. He knew that it was going to be an incredibly tense moment for the United States because they had never visualized another person in the presidency. And we know from studies that if we don't see someone, for example, that looks like us, it's really hard for us to visualize us being in that place. And so for Washington, he knew that the American people were going to have trouble visualizing someone else as president. They weren't sure if the powers of the executive branch, of the enormous trappings and responsibilities, would work if he wasn't in office. They weren't sure if foreign nations would actually respect the United States or would seize this opportunity to try and pick off maybe states along the borders or seize trade once he stepped down. And so he wanted to be there. He wanted to be alive. He wanted his name and the symbolic attachment of his support to uphold whoever came next. And it was a very intentional decision and a very radical one.